Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023, and today the subject is Spain's anti-men policy. I might come up with a more clickbaity title than that, but basically that's what it's going to be about. As part of my presentation, what I do is read fresh various articles, and this one I was sent again by Brian. Brian sent me some sterling stuff. Thanks again, Brian. This has to be done, so we're going to read it and look at the propaganda quotient. Just before I get into it, I have addressed a few subjects along this line. If you just go down through my previous videos over the last couple of weeks, you'll see stuff which is related to this, and you'll notice a tendency. And this is what I say about propaganda, because this is all it is propaganda. That's all. Everything actually that you get is essentially propaganda. I do one presentation a week where I get into the details of that for people. Partly it's on YouTube, mainly it's on Substack for my paid subscribers. You know, this is the real world, and if you want to help me, that's the way to help me, or you can support by donating. And in any case, please like and comment and all those sorts of things that everyone else tells you to do, because that's the only way that the Google algorithm is going to get me out of this basically, I suppose, shadow banned jail that I'm in. Despite that, I'm prepared to carry on for a reasonable amount of time, but there's this thing called reality. We all have to deal with it, as I'm sure everybody knows. But anyway, let's jump into this. This is the Daily Mail. Normally, as regular viewers will know, I pick on the Independent because it's free and because it's representative of the kind of nonsense, the kind of tosh that they're feeding into your minds. But this is the Daily Mail. Now, I understand people say, well, this is the Daily Mail. This isn't a serious newspaper. None of them are serious. They're only laughing at you. They completely despise you, all of them. Absolutely all of them. It's all about crowd control. You're the herd. They're the masters. They own the newspapers, and they basically have given you pretty much every idea you've ever had in your entire life, okay? And all I'm doing is pointing out the blindingly obvious. Everything I'm going to say probably in the rest of this, in fact, in most of my talks on this subject, you already know. You just haven't, possibly thought about it in this way. But nothing I'm going to say is going to amaze you. It's all obvious once it's sort of pointed out to you. Anyway, here we are, the app that tells wives if their men are doing enough housework. Spain launches tech to make sure chores are shared equally. Now, I'm just going to get into this thing about equally. Firstly, what's happened is, of course, is that men are required to continue being traditional men, i.e. protecting and providing. That's the contract, to protect and provide. Essentially, that's it. For women. While women have children, bring those children up. That's the contract. Now, what's happened is that contract has been reneged on independently of any kind of general discussion, and men are supposed to carry on being traditional men, whilst women can do whatever they like. Now, the idea is that there's this thing called chores at home, which are divided equally. Now, what the presentation will try to do is to present some kind of equivalence between men's work and women's work, but usually, I'm talking statistically, usually there isn't much of an equivalence. Sure, you can point to some women who earn a lot of money and some men who don't. Actually, my personal opinion, I don't think women should have to work. We know why they have to work. They have to work because the agenda is to make them work. And the reason why the agenda is to make them work is so that they can A, double the tax base, and B, educate your children into becoming complete drones. And this is known. I'm not guessing here. If you look up Aaron Russo, I think you can probably still find him on YouTube. He made a very good film. I can't remember the name of it right now. Perhaps somebody can mention it in the comments, where he talked about his relationship with Nick Rockefeller, who's apparently a very personable, very intelligent man who befriended or became friends with Aaron Russo and basically tried to bring him into the club. And the idea was that you join the club and you can be one of us. And Aaron Russo wasn't into it. And as part of his conversation, he asked Nick Rockefeller asked Aaron Russo. He said, where do you think feminism came from? And Russo said, well, some of it seems reasonable, and this was 15, 20 years ago when some of it did seem reasonable. I'm not talking about now, of course. And Rockefeller said, no. We designed that. We financed that, and he gave him the reasons for it. And Russo was completely stunned. He didn't know that this is how it works. Well, this is how it works, okay? And all I'm doing is pointing out how it's going to continue working. Because the thing you'll find with all of this stuff is it starts off fairly reasonably. And there are some things about, maybe first wave feminism, you think, yeah, well, perhaps it is reasonable. It always starts off reasonably, but it's where it's going, you see. Have you not seen the homosexual agenda and where that's ending up? If you have children in Western schools right now, if you're not afraid for what they're being indoctrinated into, you just don't know what's going on. Okay, so yes, it may start sounding reasonable. And here we are, doing enough housework. Spain launches tech to make sure chores are shared equally. But what about all the rest of it? What about all the rest of the work? Do they have an app to see whether men and women are doing the same amount of, let's say hard labor, or, working on oil rigs, or risking their lives on a daily basis? No, they're not. No, they're not. And so what happens, what you find with women, and this isn't a criticism, but it is an observation of women, is that women always assume a basic baseline. They assume a baseline and they work of everything they already have, and then work forward from that baseline. So their negotiating starting point is, I want everything that you've got, and now I want to negotiate upwards. Okay? This is, my 10-year-old daughter said to me the other day, she said, I'm not negotiating with you, I'm just giving you the facts. 10, all right, female. It's in their nature, and it's perfectly obvious why it's in their nature to be like this. This isn't a criticism. I love women. I love my wife. I love my daughter. I have nothing wrong with this. I'm just saying this is how they are. They're made this way, and the reason they're made this way, if you don't know, is because women don't have to fight for resources. Men do. Women get resources by means of, they're basically algorithms for obtaining resources through and attention. That's what they are. They are kind of, there's more to it than that, but that's essentially what they are. And there are good reasons for that, because they need to procreate, okay, and then they need a safe environment to do that in. So it's not a criticism, but that's what they are. And everything they get for free. A girl only has to keep waking up every day until she gets to about 13 or 14 or 15, whenever it is, and voila, here I am. You see, there's no effort involved. All she has to do is learn to, chew her food with her mouth closed, smile, laugh at jokes at appropriate times, and she's going to be fine. Her life pattern is very different to a man's life pattern. Her life pattern takes off at 14, crashes at 30, and she has these Goldilocks years in which she's a multimillionaire, and she did nothing to do it. She did nothing. She may decide to get a degree and improve her mind and all the rest of it, and that's all fine, and her mother will love it, and she'll love it, and her friends will love it, but men don't care about it. They absolutely do not care about any of it. Men's life pattern is completely different. He starts off, he's 17, he's gawky and, awkward. Have you ever seen a sort of like a very very young horse? They're sort of gangly and not really well put together. But by the time he gets to about 30, he's getting into his game. It's about to take off for him, and at that point, his life pattern is different. From between 30 and it can go on to up 70, 75, 80 even. He can be on his upswing. A woman's life pattern isn't like this. What the media is trying to do is to present an equivalence of, in fact. Sure, there's an equivalence in value. I absolutely accept that. But there is no equivalence in fact. Those very rare exceptions notwithstanding that everyone can point to. I'm talking about in reality. So anyway, let's get into it. We'll see why this is nonsense. I haven't read it, but I'm not going to read it twice. We'll just read it together. The app will enable people to log the number of hours they spend doing chores. The new app will be released as part of the government's co-responsibility plan. Well, what about everything that men do? That's not part of the equation, and you can see where this is going, can't you? This is a police state. Soon you're going to have women saying, "Well, my husband did, 0.375 less hours of housework." According to, who's going to have these apps? It's going to be women, right? They're going to be the people logging this stuff, and then you're going to have the social services turning up, taking your children away, and putting the man in prison. We lived in Spain. I lived in Spain for almost 3 years. I'm not an expert on Spain, but I saw what I saw, and I speak. I can get by in Spanish. It's not great, but I can get by. And I understood how it worked in Spain. What I realized in Spain is what you've got is you've basically got quite a lot of very attractive men, not very many very attractive women. And the men are in a position of basically subservience. You could see the pressures that these men were under, because the women are now the basically agents of the state. And the men know it. They know that at any time, like that, their life can be destroyed, and it happens every day. I think the numbers is like 400 a day or 400 a week of women, Spanish women. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that your entire life was dependent upon the emotional stability of a Spanish woman? Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? But it's true. That's how it works. And one telephone call, and they come and arrest the man, stick him in the slammer for 14 days on a woman's say-so. on an emotional Spanish woman's say-so of how she's feeling today. Can you imagine what that does to the sexual energy between a couple, right? I mean, that right there is enough to kill anything. I mean, we're talking about Spanish men, proud and strong and, all the rest of it, playing flamenco and jumping up and down. All of that's gone. And they're now basically browbeaten. I mean, I used to watch couples walking around in the places. I lived all over Spain. I lived in in the kind of, north of Alicante, in a place called Gandia. I lived in Andalusia. So we lived for about 6 months up in the north in Galicia, and lived in Salamanca. So I really spent, several months in several places all over Spain. And the kind of the recurrent theme, when you saw couples out together, the women dressed, I mean, excuse me if you're Spanish and female and you dress in a beautiful way, but I know what I saw. They dress like English women. It's absolutely appalling. It's all jeans and tattoos and all the rest of it. And the men are, I'm not saying they're all like it, but a lot of them are very presentable. And so typically what you've got is some woman who, really isn't of the same level of this, often, not always, of course, but often, extremely good looking young man. And it's almost like watching you're not quite sure what the relationship is. It looks like a mother taking her sort of teenage son out for a walk. But then no, this is a couple. And these men are basically they're living in hell. You can see it. And I had enough Spanish at that time to get into a few philosophical conversations with men when there were no women around, and discovered that this is what's going on anyway. Spain has announced plans for an app that will tell wives if their men are doing enough housework. The new app intends to address the gender imbalance of housework and will log the hours a family member spends doing chores. Again, there is absolutely no recognition in a woman's mind of what a man does. And I've given you the reasons for this. This isn't a criticism of women. I understand what they are. But you should, if you're dealing with different types of dogs, okay, a Rottweiler has a certain kind of character, a certain set of characteristics. That's not a criticism, but to ignore that and pretend that a Rottweiler is the same as a Chihuahua or the same as a Labrador is wanton stupidity, okay? Same number of chores. Angela Rodriguez, Spain's Minister for Gender Equality and Domestic Violence. Yeah, well, you can see that this would be an absolute cause for domestic violence. And what are we talking about when we talk about gender equality? There's no such thing as gender equality. There is no equality in value, but not in fact. And trying to blur the lines between those two is insanity, and you're seeing that insanity being rolled out. This is an agenda. It's Marxism. That's what it is. They discovered that Marxism 1.0 didn't work very well. And the reason is because the workers of the world, once they've got a plasma screen and a packet of Pringles and a six-pack of beer, they don't care. Okay, so what they did is they went away, the Marxists, the same people who gave us Marxism 1.0, and they are the same people, absolutely the same people who gave us the Russian Revolution, and they're not Russians. What they did is they realized that this doesn't work. We're talking about the Frankfurt School and various other organizations which are very closely connected to this, all funded by the same people, by the way. And if you get into it, you'll find out who they are. And you'll find that there are consistencies and coincidences which run right the way through all of this. And what they're out to do is to destroy you, destroy your family. And they're using this well-sounding, and it does sound well if you don't think about it very deeply, propaganda to destroy you, okay? And it's going to end up in the killing fields, because it always does. Just in case you don't know, Solzhenitsyn, it was his assessment. He's at least assumed to have said that around 60 million people were killed by the Soviet regime. Okay, you think it's not going to happen? You think it's not going to happen where you are because you live in a democracy, whatever you think that is? No, it is going to happen, and it happens, as I mention regularly, for one really basic reason. As Voltaire said, those who can make you believe in absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And this is an absurdity. And if you believe it, the next stage, and enough people do, the next stage is atrocities. I'm just warning you. I don't expect anyone to take any notice, but I'm having my say so that when it starts, I can say, well, I did what I could do. The minister said it would enable men and women, really, men and women, and we'll see about that, to log the number of hours they spend doing chores around the house. The government hopes the app will be released in the summer and will be unveiled as part of its co-responsibility plan. Well, we already have co-responsibility. What about all the responsibility that is upon men? How many women, okay, how many women, when there's a house, how many feminists are there in a house fire? I can tell you, zero, absolutely zero. Women assume everything that men do and they ignore it. And the reason is because they get their stuff for free and men have to work. Men's value is based on their achievement, stuff they actually have to do. I'm not saying it's fair. You can argue about whether it's nature or nurture. I would argue that it's essentially nature. But whatever the reason is, this is reality. And what this does is completely elide that reality and assume a baseline that precludes that reality and expects you, it requires you, demands that you proceed on that basis. And here we have this minister. Well, we can see, it's a good example of what I was talking about. I hadn't seen the picture before, but now we have. She's going to tell you how to run your family. I wonder how happily married she is. I wonder if she's a Ms. Here she is, Minister for Gender Equality. I mean, there you are. It's a meme right there. The caption writes itself, doesn't it? We women spend more time on domestic tasks than men, Rodriguez said, as reported by the Times. Yeah, and men do everything else. The minister was speaking at a conference in Geneva discussing discrimination against women, but it isn't discrimination against women. And anyway, discrimination is what? It's the ability to see the differences between things and to act accordingly. If you don't know, if you haven't read any books recently, you may like to know that the word discrimination, as used, well, for example, by Somerset Maugham, it was not so long ago, here you are, discriminating. He was a very discriminating man. It's a compliment. If somebody's unable to discriminate, it means that he's stupid. He's unable to distinguish between the differences between things. That's what they want. Now, there are real politic, there are just politic, and there are actually spiritual reasons behind all this. I'm not going to get into any of those now. I'm just trying to give you the overview. The minister presented a report at the Convention on Spain's women's rights. What about men's rights? What about women's responsibilities? You won't hear any of that. That's not the way Marxism works. Rodriguez said nearly half of the women who took part in the survey by Spain's National Statistic Institute said they did the majority of the housework in the home. Yeah. And what about the correlating survey about men and how much work they do and where they do it? Not there, of course. Comparatively, less than 15% of the men said they did the majority of house chores. Okay. Well, what's the percentage of women who do the digging in the fields? I'm sure there are some. I'm sure you could point to a few. What about the women out there in Spain, a hot country, certainly the south of it, who are digging the roads in the middle of August? What's the percentage there? It's around zero. The disparity has even caused legal rows in Spain. In April 2017, a court in Cantabria ordered a man to pay his ex-wife over 23,000 euros for the housework she overtook over the 6 years together. What about what he did? Elided from the debate. I'm not here inveighing against women. I'm just showing you that this is a communist, a Marxist agenda. It uses the language of compassion, tolerance, inclusion, and equality, but it's anything but that. And anyway, that language elides, precludes, and ignores and requires that you do the same reality. And those who can make you believe in absurdities can make you commit atrocities, and that's where this is going. Don't pretend you haven't been, don't claim you haven't been told. I'm telling you now, this is it. Earlier this year, a court in Vélez, Malaga, ordered a businessman to pay his ex-wife 204,000 euros for 25 years of unpaid domestic labour. What about him? What about what he did? They're destroying the family, and they're doing it on purpose because you're the enemy. Okay? All the rest of it is propaganda. I live in Russia, and I have a background in Russian, as I keep saying, but the fact is that Russian propaganda, Soviet propaganda, under the Soviet system, we understood that it was propaganda. There was a very well-known expression. There were two newspapers, I've mentioned this before, but there were two key kind of serious newspapers. There was Pravda, which means truth, and there was Izvestia, which means news. And the joke was, amongst better educated Russians, there's no truth in the news and no news in the truth. because everybody understood that it was all nonsense. The problem with the West is that most people don't understand that it's nonsense, and if they kind of vaguely do, they can't unpick it. I'm here to unpick it for you. Companies are now bidding to head up the new project. I'll bet they are. And guess who's going to be heading up these companies? In the hope it will be developed for release in the coming months. The government has set aside a budget of almost £185,000 for its development, Spain's ABC newspaper reported. Here we are. We have a picture of a woman who's suffering greatly because she's doing the washing up. Okay. Now, I did one about an Indian couple because they're pushing this in the so-called third world, and there was an Indian, Amrit was his name. And Amrit was out all day delivering, as far as we could ascertain from the article, canisters of gas in India. I think it was New Delhi. Doesn't matter. Hot. Okay. These things can explode. So he's out literally risking his life, as far as we could ascertain, on a daily basis. That was his job. None of that was in the article whatsoever. What we had was this rather hopeless woman who was overwhelmed by keeping 3 rooms tidy. And so, and how terrible it all was. Can't you see that this is propaganda? That's all it is. They despise you. I'm just telling you, in case you don't know. It's hoped that the app will bring to light the invisible tasks that are undertaken by women around the home, as well as the mental load. This is a feelings-based thing. You see, women will always want to get it into feelings because this is their territory. You know, this ambiguity and all the rest of it. And it's actually what we like about women. It's the reason why traditionally men have sacrificed for women. It's because women have what we don't have, and men are prepared to make the sacrifice for women, but they're destroying this. And what they're doing, if you haven't read 1984, these are the basically, if you're living with a woman in Europe, you have a spy, a government agent in your house, essentially. She may not know it, probably doesn't, but at least you should know it. Mental load, a term used to describe all the labour and thought required to run a home. Interesting that they're using the American spelling of labour, even though it's supposed to be a British article. I wonder which American journalist wrote the puff piece or the template upon which this is based. The gender equality. There can be no equality between genders. Of value, sure. In fact, no. Because it's just impossible, because we are different. Again, look how they've changed the nature of words. Do you know that gay, the word gay, now if I say the word gay, you're all going to have a whole set of mental images to come to your mind. The word gay, 50 years ago, it meant merry, blithe, generally happy. That's what it meant. And it's been turned into mean something completely different. Discrimination, the same process has happened. Look it up. Look up if you can find it. I'm sure Google will assist you. Look up how Somerset Maugham uses the word discriminating. Not so long ago, and now it's become a code word. You see, code word. A term used to describe all the labour and thought required to run a home. What about all the labour and thought that a man does? What about everything that he does? Again, my only point is elided entirely from the discussion. All right, men, they don't care about you. What they want, is for you to do everything, and then for them to take that as a baseline and then proceed from there. That's how it works. If you look how women are in the workplace, a lot of them, especially the more politicized ones, complaining about the glass ceiling, that all the top places are taken by men. Well, some of the top places are taken by 0.5% of the men. What about the other 95% of men who don't have those places? Oh, they don't want that. They want to cherry pick all the best bits and not do often what's required to get there, because actually they're, generally speaking, you can point to exceptions, but generally speaking, if we talk about a normal woman, if you can still find one, haven't been too badly genetically modified, then their primary interest is in the family and children, and that's why often they're not as dedicated to their jobs. And the ones that are, and I have met some in my professional life, are unbearable. The gender equality minister used the example of cleaning a kitchen. She said women often have to undertake this task, but must also think about purchasing extra washing up liquid or making sure there is food in the house. It's hoped that by using the app, people will see how long each family member spends on completing tasks around the home. This will include other family members like sons, daughters, or flatmates, as well as those in relationships. I think that's it. Anyway, that's all I can stand of this. Whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me, you have to admit that this is propaganda. And I would ask you to consider where it's going. Today it's an app. Today it's voluntary. Tomorrow it's compulsory. And then after that, there's going to be knocks on the door. And the government's going to be insinuating itself between you and your wife and your children and making decisions. It's already happening in Spain on a daily basis. They've destroyed the sexual energy between men and women in that country, Spain, Spanish people. They can do it there, they can do it anywhere. They roll this out. I'll just tell you how it works in case you haven't worked it out yet. They beta test each part of the agenda in a particular region. And once they've ironed out the bugs, they roll it out across the entire world. It's how it works. Anyway, don't expect my work to change anything. I'm just hoping to help people read the media with the contempt that it deserves, and to understand that the only purpose of it, the only practical application of it, is to understand the agenda. You should use it as you use when you go into an airport. You see that big board with all of the airplanes and all the flights and where they're coming to and where they're going to and all coming from going to. You can see what the general picture is, like a stock market, the same. For me, I have a background in it. For me, it's like in the Matrix. He says, I don't even see the ones and zeros anymore. I don't even see the ones and zeros anymore. It doesn't affect me. I just see the propaganda payload. That's all I'm interested in. This isn't about educating you. It's about indoctrinating you. That's all it is. Understand it that way, read it that way, and perhaps, you won't be able to save your family. It's too late. You can't undo $1 trillion worth of conditioning, but you may be able to save your own mind. Anyway, that's the end of that one. Details of where I upload to, how you can join my Substack and Telegram channel, support my work, and download my books free are in the description. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.